All right, I hit the right button. Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to today's discussion on using the arts to heal from trauma. And I thank everybody for participating. What I generally like to do is allow people to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about who they are and what they've been doing. Then we can take it from there. So why don't we, Amy, start with you right now. So Amy, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. My name's Amy Erickson, and I have recently produced and directed a documentary film called Visceral: Transforming Trauma Through Theater. I have a background in nonprofit consulting. I've been doing that for about almost 30 years. But I discovered by stepping on stage in my 50s that I found a way to begin healing from trauma and wanted to explore that in other people's lives. And my film includes experts like Bessel van der Kolk, Stephen Porges, and Gabor Mate, and talks about 4 people who have performed in musical theater, drama, and Shakespeare to help unlock the trauma in their bodies.
And I'll give it, everybody, we'll get the link to, to the film as well. It's an amazing film that everybody should actually watch at some point when they get a chance. Diane, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Diane Kaufman, and I'm a poet, artist, and child psychiatrist. When I was a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, my mom saved like so many things from when I was a child. So I can see the childhood composition about what you want to be when you grow older. And I had written, I wanted to be a medical drawer, D-R-A-W-E-R, or a medical doctor. And it's sort of taken me a lifetime, but I've combined those 2 things. I'm interested in personally and helping others, transforming trauma and despair into creativity. A story that I wrote a number of years ago at an arts and healing workshop that I attended for my own self-healing. That story is called Bird That Wants to Fly, and it inspired a children's opera. There was a friend of the opera company is Danny Glover, the actor, and he narrated the story. And then when I came to Oregon about 8 years ago, I was thinking that it would make a wonderful puppet performance, and met a puppeteer who wrote a grant for an Oregon Regional Arts and Culture Council grant, and then it became a puppet performance. Very much love collaborating with other creative spirits, writing songs. I have a number of suicide prevention songs. And if there's a place to show it here, 10 years ago, I think it was 10 years ago, with the terrible Sandy Hook massacre, I had written a poem called In Memory of the Future, in the sense of looking back, at the present moment, and then look back in memory of the future. Can we change the present so our memory, right, is going to be different? And that was performed by high school students at Newark Arts High School. And there was another poem that I did that I created as a narration, a video narration, that was done in 2018. It's called The Only Prayer I Have. And that's also about school shootings. So I bring that up because of the terrible events in Texas.
Yeah, like I said, after, tomorrow or beginning of next week, I'll send everybody all of the links to all of the pieces that we're talking about, so that everybody could see it. I saw it when you posted that this morning, Diane, and I shared it on my Facebook page.
Yeah.
I would say we could show it, but if you know how to do that, I guess. But
I can wait till everyone. I know how to do it.
Okay, so then
I just need to be made co-host under participants.
Got it.
Drop down of participants to the right, there'll be 3 little dots. And if you click on that, one of them will say make co-host.
Okay. I'm clicking, but nothing is happening on participants. Okay, nothing is happening. We'll try it again later. Yeah, for some reason, nothing is happening when I click on that. All right, I'll try it again later. And if not, also what I'd like to do is put everybody's information or your piece. I try to collect what I can and put on my YouTube channel also, so that it all coincides with some of the discussions that we're having. So if I could get somebody to figure that part out, I can do that too. I need some technical. I need a technology person. Connie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Connie Keffinger, and I'm an indie playwright. I do theater. I've been doing theater my whole life since I graduated from undergrad in the 80s. And I went to Penn State, and I always loved theater. In fact, I was born into it. And I say that because I had severe allergies when I was a kid and I wasn't allowed out. So I would watch my sisters playing in the backyard. I'd sit on the casement windows and I just watch. So I had a natural stage window for myself, and I would write my own plays and stories. So I was born to do this, I think. And I've done it my entire life. I had a women's theater company for a while, and I had a healing arts theater company for a while. And I then went into the back to the university and got a master's degree from Carnegie Mellon in literary and cultural theory. Because, when you're a young playwright, you want to hear what you want to write about, what you think. And as you get older, you want to know what everybody else thinks. So, cultural theory and sociology and issues about what's happening in our world have always been very important to me. And if I have one thing I can do with my life, it would be to help somehow solve the issue of senseless violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's for sure. You should mention the play.
Yes, the last time we were on with Lois, I used a piece, and I had some actors work through a play that I did at Manhattan Repertory Theater many years ago, and they did just a reading of it online, a virtual piece, and it was done fairly decently, and people were very moved by it. So we've decided to move into that. And Catherine Elliott is our director, and there's several other actors involved, and Lois is producing, and so it's something really wonderful happened from this last meeting that we had.
Yeah, it was like you said, creativity begets creativity, and I think it's an important piece, and I'm excited to be on board with that one.
Yeah, and Carrie, who just came on, is the principal actor in that. So,
hi everyone. Thanks, Connie. It's great to be part of this piece. It's so powerful.
Yeah, it definitely will be a very important piece. What I kind of like to do is kind of just throw out a couple of questions. Most of you are artists in your own right and have used your art form, whatever it is, to help you heal in and of itself for yourself. Like Amy, if I asked you, the film that you you made, did that help you personally heal? And how was that process for you? You're on mute.
Yes, I just saw that. Okay, yes, that making visceral, learning about some of the key aspects of the social engagement system, and Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory, and really engaging with what's going on in my body. I knew that was happening as I performed on stage, but then when I made the film, all the science and all of the medical aspects of it really fell into place for me, and I learned so much, a lot.
Yeah. When was the point that you actually felt like, okay, this is definitely a turning point. I know that what I'm doing is helping me heal. And then you went on to do the documentary.
Well, it was when I no longer could feel joy in my life, and that the trauma that I had experienced in early childhood trauma was just had me stuck. And then a doctor said, you really need to find your joy. And the only thing I'd ever experienced that made me feel joy was being on stage, and especially moving and singing and acting all at once. And that was when I really knew I needed to tell my story through 4 other people's stories.
Yeah. I'm going to kind of put it out there for people to respond to that. Diane, you have any? Okay.
Yeah. Well, Amy, could you say a little bit more about, yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. Amy, can you say a little bit more about what you just said about learning of yourself through also other people's stories?
Because all of us were stuck in our lives, and we were either shut down, unable to express ourselves, or we were acting out in our lives and destroying relationships because we couldn't manage the rage, and just that whole a lifestyle of just, always being reactive. That was the turning point for me. And watching and hearing them tell their stories about either being shut down or, in a hyper arousal, and bringing it back to my own life and going through some of the personal challenges I was having as a 55-year-old woman trying to heal. And that was the turning point for me.
Oh,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. Would anybody else like to respond to that question about the arts and healing for themselves? Going once, going twice.
I can say something about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I could say more about Bird That Wants to Fly. So in the workshop I went to, it was in New York, and it was through the Therapeutic Arts Alliance of Manhattan. And the theme of the workshop, and there had been a series of workshops, but this was, I think, just a day-long workshop, was on identity and integration. So it's sort of like putting the parts of yourself together. And the process that they used was very interesting. And it's sort of like Jung's active imagination. So we were asked to, first there were warm-ups, right, of mirroring each other and vocal exercises. And then at some point, they asked us to take 3 pieces of paper representing 3 parts of yourself. They didn't really give other directions than that. And with your non-dominant hand to just scribble on the page without any intention or purpose of what you were drawing, but just to kind of scribble with your non-dominant hand. And then to look at the scribble and see if you saw an image in that scribble. and then to pull it out. So draw more to pull it out, to create it, and then to label it, give it a name. And in my exercise, and I still have these drawings from about 10 years ago or so, the first one looked like a bird, so I made it into a bird, and I called it Bird That Wants to Fly. And the second one looked like a horse, and so I made it into a horse, and I called it Beautiful Animal That You Are. And then I changed that to Beautiful Animal That I Am. And then the third looked like a loop-de-loop, and I made it into a roller coaster with a please, and then drew a please enter sign with arrows. And I titled it Roller Coasting is Fun, True, False, or Both. And then we were asked to speak for the image, become the image, and to be in the center of a circle and act it out. So to give voice to it. And then after all that, the culmination was to write. And out of that experience, and I certainly did not go into the workshop thinking I'm going to be writing about anything. I was just kind of going into the workshop, and I had met the two women. Emily Nash was one of them, creative expressive arts therapist, and the other, whose name I'm blocking, but I'm hoping I'll remember her name, is an art therapist, was the co-leader. Stephanie Wise is her name. Other than that, I don't think I knew anybody in the group. So I wrote a story, and it just that itself was a healing experience. So in the story, and I wrote the story from first word to last word without one edit. And the story is about really a forlorn bird that says, like, life is so dreary and its tail feathers are stuck between its legs, and it's walking by the winter carnival, and it ends up looking in a puddle, and it can't change direction. And it looks down, and instead of seeing its dejected reflection, it sees like its inner self. And there's the words, beautiful animal that I am is in the water. And it looks up and it sees a magical horse. And then the magical horse listens to it. And unbeknownst to me on a conscious level, because I wasn't thinking this consciously, but I have to think that the unconscious was at play, because the bird and the horse together is Pegasus, which is the symbol of transformation and poetry and resilience. So the horse listens, and the bird climbs up the back of the horse as it can't fly. And then the horse says, doesn't it take longer to walk? Why aren't you flying? And then the little bird tells its story, and it says, I'm going to get confused, so I'll say it in one sentence. And it's all, and the trauma of the bird was rainstorms, blizzards, snowstorms, children with rocks, men with shotguns, birds crashing into each other. So it decides to walk. And then the horse encourages it to fly, but says, I know the owner of the roller coaster. So it's like the relationship. It'll be just us two. We can go together. But first, I want you to spread your wings. And then the bird, spreads its wings. And the last scene is the bird flying on this in the sky. When I self-published the story, and I found an illustrator that I liked through a Salva Regina University, I had done a training in expressive arts through there, and happened to be getting their catalogs and was looking at their catalog. And I saw a newly graduated college student in Newport, Rhode Island. I liked her artwork. She had done a display of zoo animals, and I got on the phone from New Jersey and called up Rhode Island, and they found her for me. But it was interesting that in self-publishing the book, there was like extra blank pages, like in the beginning, at the end of the book, there's some blank pages, and couldn't figure out how to get fewer of those blank pages. And then it occurred to me that although the storybook ended, the story did not end. It's like, what's going to happen next? And then I created a page, last page, saying the story has ended, but what do you think is going to happen next? So, and then it's an invitation to write and to draw. And then through like a miraculous series of events, it inspired a children's opera. So one thing is, I think, just in terms of healing, to take maybe my own struggles and see it through the metaphor of the bird, right? And then through the imagination to imagine and make real a relationship, which is an external relationship, but maybe a relationship, an internal relationship. It's sort of like the hurt bird and the strong horse. That's really parts of oneself, right? And then, of course, to see it transformed into music and dance and theater and everybody coming together to do this. And then you see the audience is getting enthusiastic, they're empathic towards what's happening. And then when I was working in Newark, New Jersey, at a University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey, which is in Newark, which is now Rutgers Biomedical and Health Sciences. But as I was working on the story, I would share what was going on. Oh, here's another illustration, and then with some of my patients, I would share the story and would ask questions about, it starts off in the beginning this way and it ends up that way. What do you think changed, or what did the horse do for that little bird? And I remember one child talking about love, right? And then you can take the story and ask how it applies to their own life. So I'm all about creativity. As long as you're creative, you're alive and there's hope for something new.
Well, that's the whole basis. Like when we talk about prevention, if we if we encourage the arts from the very beginning, the arts and creativity. I mean, years ago, we used to say the arts are a new prescription for health and wellness. It's kind of coming into its own a little bit more now, I think, but the creativity and this self-expression and the communication that it allows is a prevention tool unto itself that is just not utilized the way it should be as much. I mean, when you spoke about using a non-dominant hand, we used to do it, excuse me, we used to do an exercise, have your non-dominant hand talk to your dominant hand and see what became, what kind of conversation would that look like when you step back at it and then look at it from a distance. It's very interesting just to tell people and ask people to use their non-dominant hand for anything, because it's something that you usually are not, you do not do. And it just breaks through all of that, the resistance of the empty page, because you're not expected to do anything perfect or anything great, because it's not your dominant hand. So it's a really great exercise. I still use it today. I use a doodle journal every morning. And there are times when I still do that same exercise. And when step back and then I look at it a week later, and I could actually see the conversation that I kind of had going with myself. So it's really interesting, some of the exercises, and I did that with teens as well. When we were working with the kids. I'd like to put it out there for anybody else that would like to introduce themselves to all of us. So would anybody else like to say hello and tell us, where you're coming from and what you're doing? Anybody?
Sure. I'm Martha Rand, and I'm an artist and a creative arts therapist and a licensed clinical social worker. Diane, I remember seeing that opera when it was in Patterson.
Oh my goodness.
And so I work, right now I'm working in the schools, and we've been I put together a group this past spring specifically to help middle school students with managing, self-regulation, managing to have a space to share any thoughts or feelings on all the things that have happened over the last 2 years. And we have used as a starting for the group, it was an eight session group, working with mandalas and then teaching some kind of a self-regulating activity that could be through the arts or it could be through the body, so that we could give kids a chance, a space to share about whatever they wanted to share about. It's in the school, so we're not looking in this particular setting to be a clinical therapeutic environment, but it's the beginnings of allowing kids to talk about what they've been through. And I think middle school age is so important because they can create something and they can begin to share about it. They can articulate about it. Sometimes younger kids, they can create something and it can be very helpful and healing for them, but not all of them have the ability to discuss it in terms of the insight that it gives to them. And I think middle school is kind of the cusp of that awareness for many human beings. And so so that's been a really positive group that I've been able to put together. So I'm very happy with that.
Mhm. Anybody else?
Yeah, Lois. Well, I think what I'd like to do is kind of answer the question you had asked before, or the topic is as a way of introducing myself. I don't necessarily think I call myself an artist, but I have been writing short stories and some short plays. And what I found is that it's a way of giving myself a voice, and not having a voice, or not being listened to, or maybe being afraid to have a voice is one of the issues that stem from trauma in the past. So that I have found that writing stories, usually fictional, but based on some aspects of my life, is a way of expressing myself that I haven't always felt comfortable doing. And I don't know if I'd call that healing, except healing in the sense that it does allow me to express and be heard. So if you consider short story writing, fictional writing to be artistic, I would say that's an example of some healing from the arts.
So all creative expression, that's what it boils down to. And if you can get it out, that's the
Yeah.
most important thing. Doesn't have to, you don't have to share it with anybody else, as long as it's for you. There are a lot of poetry and things that I write throughout my husband's 5-year cancer battle. I wrote, page after page of poetry, but it's not the type of thing that I want to share with anybody. It was just for me, because it just made me feel better. And that's how I was able to deal and cope with, things that were going on. So it's just a matter of getting it out. Sometimes, Diane, you should, if you keep it in and it festers and it boils up, that's when all of the anger and the frustration and, turns to any number of things, from addiction to suicide you know, am I on the right track there, Diane? You know,
Oh,
Yes.
can I just say one thing about, this whole idea that you're posing? I'd like to throw out to the group the idea that if we're not creative, we'll be destructive. Is that where you're heading with
yeah,
that?
exactly. You know, if you keep everything in, it can lead to self-destruction.
Right.
That's why
Yeah, I
always
agree with that. Oh,
No, go ahead. Just jump in.
I have to say the one kind of important thing I forgot to mention is that I'm a recovering drug addict and alcoholic, because that's what I did to self-regulate before I was able to, discover what my nervous system was telling me about what I was not able to regulate. And that's how I did it. So gratefully I'm in recovery 35 years, but even after that, it took me a long time to understand what my body was trying to tell me. So sorry, I had to jump in there.
No, please, everybody just jump in. This is not a formal, panel discussion. I don't do this.
I could add that maybe that destruction can also include self-stagnation, where what's in the person is being suppressed, right? And maybe they're becoming depressed. Maybe they're not overtly destructive, but on a soulful level, in a way, there's destruction happening because they're stagnating, right? Or don't see the possibility of something new or something different, change, positive change, being stuck, as it were.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I can share another example regarding creativity, creative process, and trauma. In 2019, I learned that a mental health clinician that I had known at my first job when I came to Oregon, I was there maybe 2 years, and then I went on to another position where I'm currently at. But I had become friends with her. Her name's Stacy. She was a mental health clinician. She was I used to think if I had a young child who had mental health problems, I would bring them to Stacy, because I thought she was fantastic. Very talented, very warm, very loving, mother of 2 sets of twins. We would have team meetings together a couple of times. I and some of the other clinicians went out to lunch together. We didn't have an ongoing friendship, but I considered her my friend, and vice versa. Well, I learned that she killed herself in August of 2019. Found out on Facebook when condolences were written on another friend's Facebook page. And I immediately called up that friend and asked what happened. And apparently she she was probably in her 40s. She became divorced. And then related to that or not related to that, developed a series of depressions, inpatient admissions, had stopped working, and it ended up that she jumped off a bridge and left 2 sets of young twins behind. And I was just shocked. Last person on earth I could have ever imagined something like that happening to. And I really felt in a visceral way that depression had devoured her. That's what it felt like to me. And about 2 weeks after her death, I was walking to Starbucks on a street parallel to my street. That street happens to be named Lovejoy. So I'm walking down Lovejoy Street, and the street is tree lined. And I saw a tree that had shoots coming out of the lower bark of it. And I didn't know anything about trees and tree growth. So my interpretation, also thinking about my friend, was that the tree really wanted to live. And I took a photo of the tree and I wrote down the words, just like this tree, we all yearn to grow. Hope lives, shame kills. Every day is Suicide Prevention Day. May take good care of yourself, and may you grow ever stronger in your love. So I wrote those words down, I think, on a scrap of paper, and I sent the photo of the tree and my words to Amanda Meador, with whom I collaborated with before. She's an artist, and she created a poster out of that. The original poster had the tree, and I can show, in a moment, I have a card of it, I can show it to you. It had the roots of the tree kind of dangling. And I said, Mandy, you've got to put earth around the roots, so it's literally grounded. And I went on with that. So that whole process, I think, was my own expression, and also wanting to help someone else. I think part of trauma potentially is you don't want someone else to go through that experience. So out of that experience of doing that poster, I thought of the title Creative Lifelines, which is Creative Lifelines reaches out with compassion and creativity to help save lives. And a whole series of posters came out of that for mothers and children, fathers and children. There was one where there's a woman in the poster, she's holding her cat, and the text says, like, I always remember my cat needs me, what's your purpose, what's your reason to live? And on the back, and from the poster came the idea of an art card. On the back of the card, it has resource numbers. And just this Sunday was the NAMI Walks event, National Association on Mental Illness event in Portland. And I was there with the Just Like This Tree banner. It was, like a giant banner, 7 feet tall or whatever, and the art cards too. And it was really wonderful because so many people came over to talk about the beauty of the banner and what it said. And I think in appreciation of expressing that pain, but also in an artful, beautiful way. I think there's a way that one can express something that's terrible, but also there's a aesthetic element of being able to take that in, right, through the artistic rendering. So I'm going to step away so I can show you the art card. Okay.
Oh, okay. Okay, terrific. Excuse me. Anybody else have any thoughts on using, the arts and how it's helped you personally heal? Or
Well, I just wanted to, first I'll let her see.
yeah, I saw the poster on
There's resources on the back.
terrific. Carrie?
I think first I wanted to preface all of this by saying that, especially talking about mental health right now during what's gone on during the past 2 years with this pandemic, I think it's affected all of us on some level, on varying levels. And I think we see it in even our friends and our communities. I think you can see it from the way people post on social media, things they say, things they talk about, things that they even repress, things they hold down that are bothering them about all this. As a child, I had a difficult, my parents broke up, and I had a difficult childhood when I was 5, and it was not a good relationship. And I saw a lot of arguing and stuff. And, I always use the arts. I mean, I wound up becoming an actor and, artist, but I always use the arts. I would, in the backyard, in the small apartment we lived in, I would always make up all of these plays and I would act them out. I'd have like a theater of one in my backyard, and it was always a refuge for me. And so when I went on to, start doing school plays and speeches as a teenager, and then in college, it made sense. And I was teaching for a while a special content program. So I taught kids a lot of this stuff, how to use the arts to enhance their lives. And at that point, I found myself in a really bad relationship with an ex-fiance. And I found myself, my dad had a recurrence of his cancer, and it was a 3-year struggle from my dad until everything seemed to time at the same time. It was like, my ex-fiance was not there for me during that time when my dad was passing away and everything was just building up. And when you were talking about, learning how to move with one hand, I actually had fingers stuck in a car door, which was probably one of the most painful things. They were fractured, bleeding for days, rebroken. And it was coming out of an argument with my ex-fiance, who my dad was getting blood transfusions at the time. And he said, I think we should just break up. And it was a very destructive relationship. And I was panicking. And he said, people were looking at us because obviously this did not look like a good relationship. So the security guard in the parking lot said, do you need any help? And I was like, no, I was looking this way. I was looking this way. He was yelling, just move forward. He didn't realize to open the door and my finger didn't clear the door. And I was looking all around. And I think it's always a symbol to me. I even have problems with the hand opening jars, opening things, and I have to use my non-dominant hand. It's a reminder of how destructive, one, as a woman, that relationship was for me, and a realization every day, and being lucky and glad I didn't continue on and marry that person. And two, I wound up obviously facing all of that battle with my dad in the last days and being there for him alone. And I lost more and more sight at some point of that acting and the writing and all of it. And it was really after my dad passed away, trying to find my way back to it. And there was so much depression and so much pain. And I just want to preface it and say to everyone too, that I was always generally a really happy person. And people would say in the hospital that, I got all dressed up and I put the makeup on and I had a smile for the nurses and the doctors, but you never know what anyone is really going through underneath. And I think that's the thing to know, because I was in a lot of pain and I had never been that depressed in my life, but tried to hide it from people by putting on a good kind of external appearance. But the smile really underneath that, I was really breaking apart. And that's when I started, I even started writing music. It wasn't something I shared, like I write, but it wasn't something I shared a lot with other people. It was just for me, and discovering new music and finding a choir that I sing with to this day, called Peace of Heart Choir. They're an amazing group that I've been with almost a decade, and finding joy and giving joy to other people. I think spreading the love, but also because I got to a really down point. I was extremely depressed, and I was walking through a park that in my neighborhood that I used to walk through with my dad when he was really ill, when he was still able to walk in that park with me. And I was crying, and I was thinking, I would say, some destructive thoughts that people would be surprised that I was thinking, and that weren't like my usual thoughts. And a dollar bill, when you're telling that story, Diane, I think of like things that happen that seem like they're meant to happen. And a dollar bill, just, there was a breeze breezed into my path and like fell at my feet. And I picked it up and it said, "Where's George?" And my dad's first name was George. And I know they have those bills, but I thought, it's like my tears stopped, and I knew that he was with me all of the time, and that I was meant to get that. And the thing was, it gave me hope. And the next day I wound up meeting people I hadn't seeing them on the street in a long time. And we started working on a talk show together. And they were themes that were important to me. And it was everything from school bullying to, I even did something about how people are buried and natural ways of burial and all of these different things. We did all kinds of topics. We also did movie topics too. But I wound up healing, through the arts, finding my way back to acting and actually realizing that I needed to do that. I couldn't not have that in my life. And what it gave to me, it fed my soul and it saved me.
The arts definitely save lives. The arts in general, all of them, just kind of break down all those walls of resistance. It's like, I remember doing a workshop in a juvenile detention facility. And I walked in there as part of, in New Jersey, we have these alcoholism councils in each county, and it's sponsored by one of the councils. So I kind of went in there as a prevention, it was a prevention program. But I walked in and the kids were all in a group, and at first I sat down and introduced myself, and one of the girls just openly said to me, you know, if this is another talk session, then count me out. I'm getting up and leaving right now. They're kind of all talked out. I had this big bag of tricks. So I took out a bunch of blank paper and a bunch of crayons, and I handed it to all of them. And I said, I'm not here to talk. You know, I don't care if you say one word to me right now. I said, but here's crayons and paper, and just do what you want with it. You know, just draw, scribble, write. And they got so involved in the process of just being creative, and nobody standing over their shoulder asking them how they felt and what was going on in their lives. But over the course of the 3 years that I did the program, I knew all of them intimately just through their artwork. They didn't have to say a word to me or to anybody else, because they were laying it out right in front of us. And you could see the joy on their faces by just getting involved in the process. It was not about what the final product was. You know, I would say to them, if you don't want to show it to me, that's fine with me as well. But if you want to share it, that's okay too. And it was just the fact that I gave them the opportunity to express themselves however they felt comfortable, that they all opened up. You know, juvenile detention is supposed to be short-term placements, but I had the same kids for 3 years anyways, so that's a whole other story. But Martha, I'm sure you see that, you know, in the school settings.
Well, I run, as well as doing the social work after school, I run an arts program for the kids in the middle school. And I have always felt that for me, that the arts personally have been very healing. I mean, I was the kind of a child who my mother would go to parent teacher night and the teachers would say, oh, I didn't know that you spoke English in your home because Martha never says anything, because I literally would not say a word. I mean, up until I was about in 4th grade. And even then it was kind of under duress, you know. And what I see with the kids in middle school, where, you know, there are so many things that are impacting them, particularly now, to be between 11 and 14 in the world that we're living in right now, is to cope with a great deal. I mean, just even today, because of the shooting in Texas yesterday, you know, I can take the kids to a park, which is about a block away from the school, for recess or even for our group. But today they wouldn't let anyone leave the school. There was nothing in particular happening. There was no threat. There was nothing. It was just, you know, to keep people in the school. But the kids have a chance to simply draw or paint. And, you know, I think that it's so wonderful to be able to give them that opportunity. And that was so much of what I needed, because I really was much more engaged with things like dance and movement as a way that expressed myself than feeling comfortable putting things into words. So,
Well, but that's it. Yeah, we generally, especially in school settings, I mean, I know from all my past experiences working in the schools that we don't allow free creative expression. You know, it's like very within the limits of an institution type of thing. It's like, after one of the school shootings, I was doing a program in one of the high schools for a group of at-risk youth, and again, they were, I had given them, paper and markers, and we were talking about the school shooting. I don't remember which one it was, unfortunately,
Terrible.
but they drew pictures of guns, and they had violent images. And the school social worker came up to me and said, "You can't do that. They can't draw that. They can't do that in school. We have a no gun policy. I said, "Isn't that the reason why I'm here?" It was like, it didn't make any sense to me. If we're trying to get kids to learn how to express themselves and to grow up to be creative adults and deal with, their own issues or whatever creatively, we're stopping them in their tracks in school. We're telling them in art class, you have to draw a tree the way a tree looks. I mean, I had my own son who I would allow to draw whatever he wanted, but when he was in school and the art teacher saw how he was drawing the tree, criticized him because that's not what a tree looks like. It just doesn't seem to go together. If we're trying to tell kids, and even as adults, it's okay to express yourself, communicate it. The end product is not the most important thing if we're doing it for the process itself and the creative energy.
I think in the school, because there is certainly a lot of fear that children will decompensate or go into crisis, which is not, I don't think that's the way that it works, I mean, but there is that fear, if a child writes something that expresses, something that is difficult or violent, that it means that they're going to act it out. And I think, in many instances, it actually means the exact opposite, that they were able to put it out there in a way that they dealt with it in some creative fashion, so that it wasn't bottled up inside them. But I think, for me, being a school social worker, I've been in this district for 20 years, and it's taken a long time. I'll tell you some of the first administrators that I worked with, when I would say, well, we're working on process-oriented things, school is very goal-oriented.
Yes.
You will perform to X standard on Y test, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the idea of being process-oriented and allowing things to not go to after-school art and be taught perspective, or to be taught, a particular art technique, but to be given a chance to simply open up your free expression.
Yeah.
This is a risky idea in a school setting, and you have to build up a lot of trust with your administrators, your co-workers.
Mhm.
to be
Yeah,
able to do
can I
that.
jump in there on that and just say that the irony of what you just said, Martha, is that it is a process. We are trying to process that and integrate that, and to not be able to do that, is where we will be continuing to shove it down. Like when I started to make this documentary, the number of people that came to me and said, you can't do that. You can't talk to people about their trauma, and the triggers are just going to send them off into orbit. And, do you know what you're doing to these people and re-traumatizing them? And I said, well, I am experiencing the same things that they are talking about to me on camera. And we are both experiencing the same things when we perform. And when we are able to recognize what's coming up for us and then integrate that, I do think there's a lot of healing there. And there were so many people who wanted to talk to me about their experience. So I was I was relieved as a filmmaker, but also because I was going through the same thing that they were.
But that's what's, when it comes down to, doing a documentary or Connie, the play, you play the therapist, you're telling your story, but it's a collective story. It's not, it didn't only happen to you. You're not the,
Yeah.
and that's what the arts come in. That's where an audience comes in.
Exactly. Theater was created, one of the first components of the Greeks was to make a union between the actors and the audience. Thespis stepped outside of the circle and communicated with the audience, and it's that bond. And the whole thing, I think this is what COVID, I'm not a psych professional or a social worker, but I'll tell, being in the theater for over 40 years, I know one thing: if you start with a goal in mind, you're dead in the water. You can't live your life based on result. You just can't. And the same is true with the arts. It's when you step into process. And that's because I'm going to put this forward. I had mentioned earlier that I developed a pedagogy for teaching art, and it has to do with conforming, reforming, deforming. But when we perform, we perfect our human life form. And when we step into process, it's because we're actually balancing our attention and our concentration. In the theater, we have a role to play. And then we also have to concentrate on our role, but we also have to pay attention to the other people. So we're balancing concentration and attention, so that we are in the present moment. And that's how the magic happens.
And I
Exactly.
think, Connie, that what you're talking about there and what you're talking about in, and which is a part of that, is that you build community through that, and that it is so important to have a community that is where you're doing your healing and where other people are also doing their healing, and that you are able to allow that process to happen.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, sorry, Connie.
Okay, Martha, I was going to say, I just experienced that to the utmost. In 2018, I was in Athens working on a project, and I was at a play, a huge amphitheater, and there were over 4,000 people there. And the Greek audience, I was taken aback because, I'm American and we don't do this. People were smoking and eating and walking around. And then I finally realized after about 20 minutes, I said, how could they possibly even have an intermission? Because there's 4,000 people here, it would take half the night. And then I felt it. The people were part of the whole experience. It was talk about community. It was fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
Well, I think that for me, going back to the idea of community, being able to use my eyes when I'm acting on stage and I'm connected to another person in a sustained and contained way, that created that feeling of safety that I was able to sort of take out into the real world and understand what it meant to look into another person's eyes and not have fear. And then that's making the documentary. I learned what that truly is. That is how we evolved as humans. We have to be connected this way through our voice and through our ears. And then it goes back down through our brainstem and our vagal nerve down into our guts. And then you have a bunch of science there. So, but I learned that. It was fascinating.
That's that mind-body connection. I don't think we actually get how integrated the mind-body connection truly is until you actually kind of go through something so stressful that you feel it in your body, and It happened to me when I was taking care of my husband, and the stress obviously was unbelievable. And I always used to say, I'm taking care of myself. I'm okay. I'm okay. Until afterwards, when my body felt, I mean, it just literally collapsed after he had passed away, pretty much, and I sat down with canvases and my paints and blasting the music, and I just got so into doing these process paintings to literally just relax my mind, and just block everything else out. And my body slowly, along with a lot of medical attention, but it slowly got back to a very calm, relaxed state where I was able to think clearly. It's getting absorbed in the moment and just letting that, the whole body just basically just unwind. But as adults, I see it in adults. It's like you walk around year after year taking everything in, and all the incidents that have happened to you, whether starting when you were a child, a teenager, an adult. And when you tell an adult, give them a blank sheet of paper and say, just scribble. Because the thought of writing something down or drawing something or whatever on a blank sheet of paper is so threatening that they can't, they literally, I've seen freeze, and then I'll say, again, just close your eyes and just scribble, just like remember when you were 5 years old and you were in kindergarten and you were just playing. That's where we have to get back to in order to heal from all those years of kind of trying to fit into a box.
And I want to go one step further with you, Lois. You said the mind-body connection. I think we're also talking about the spirit, and not in a religious sense, the spirit of creativity, the spirit of game. That performance is spiritual. And we are spiritual beings because there are things in us that can't be defined in mental or physical. So that part of us, which is the creative spirit, comes through. And people laugh sometimes when I say my religion is, and I've followed a traditional religion path, but I sang in a choir and went to church for many years, but my religion, my true religion, is the theater, because that is where my creative spirit can connect with everybody else.
Yeah. I kind of like to think of it as creativity is like this raw energy.
Exactly.
And the art form is the final product or whatever it is that you're seeing on paper or listening to or watching unfold.
Absolutely.
I can give an example going back to community. So a long time ago, I was practicing city yoga meditation and was going to an ashram in upstate New York. And in their bookstore, which was filled with incense and musical instruments and just so beautiful, I reached for a book, a children's book, which was an illustration of Walt Whitman's poem, I Hear America Singing. And in the bookstore, maybe this was the creative spirit, I just was sort of overcome, and I wrote a poem, and I called it, I Hear America Sing, I Hear America's Children Are Singing. That was the name of my poem. And it was about really the pain of children, and that is anyone listening to them. And the poem became the benediction to a Share Our Strength literary fundraiser. And then I was volunteering. I volunteered myself to go to Hawkins Street School. It was an elementary school in Newark, New Jersey. And I was doing kind of a writing workshop with 7th grade students. And I shared with them about the poem and also sort of where the poem had taken me, like like being the emissary of the energy. So the poem had taken me into that, to be next to, I think he was a Pulitzer Prize winning poet, was the lead poet at this fundraiser, which was like a 5-star chefs, and all that stuff. And I was the benediction to it. And the poem was, and I'd gotten a postcard about the event, to go to the event. And I had called them up saying, I have this poem and I wonder if you might be interested in it. And initially she said yes, but then shortly thereafter, she called me back and she said no, because they had not 1 minute extra. And I read to her the poem on the phone, just like this is what I would have said. And then she said, you can be the benediction. And then I shared that story with the students. And then I asked them, like what is singing in you, right? What needs to be expressed? And they began writing their poems. And then the teacher took her 7th and maybe 8th grade classes, and we had an evening poetry recital. And the young people the girls were dressed in gowns and the boys were all in suits, and parents were giving them flowers, and the children were reading out their poetry, and the poetry was very, very emotional about a lot of pain that they had experienced. And I remember one girl was reading her poem and she couldn't do it and started crying. And everybody, there was so much love from everyone in supporting each other. And the event was called, I Hear My Community Singing. And then the teacher had the students write what the experience was like for them. And also the parents were asked to write what the experience was like to them. And it was just so deep and emotional, parents saying, I didn't know, that my child was feeling that way. And young people saying this was the best day of my life. So for that, hopefully that was not going to be the very best day of their life. But the whole idea that they could express themselves and be heard and be supported, there was no judgment, everyone was being authentic. So it was quite wonderful.
Yeah, it's I always find it fascinating, the whole, I couldn't be a teacher and I couldn't work in a school system full time because there's no way I'd be able to, kind of function in an institution that restricting. So as I would go in, and I would go into even the adult facilities, I went into a couple of rehab centers, to work with adults in rehab, and it's kind of it's the same thing, it's like they're still stuck in that mentality of, I've got to do something to show something, it's not, I can't say how I feel freely. It's just, they have to be taught literally how to express themselves all over again to let that guard down. It's like you got to break through that wall, the initial wall that's there. And that's what I've always loved about the arts, because you can break through, you can break down that wall of resistance so much easier than sitting across somebody and questioning them all the time, as to how they're feeling and what happened and things like that. It just makes things, so much easier as far as, just getting things out, and then, okay, the times that we do a piece of art for a product, we actually get a product out of it. Like Connie, you wrote the play, it's your story, the therapist, and I'm sure during that process, it helped you personally heal.
Sure.
But now you have a product for everybody else to see and to comment on and to, you know, to judge in their own mind as to, you know, does this story relate? How does it relate to me? So then it becomes a different give and take. You know, it's your process, your product out there. Now somebody is going to react to it.
Absolutely. I want to share something with you guys right now that's about how, you know, people say, where do you get your inspiration? Where do things come from? Well, I work with Joe Eisen, who's a composer and also a playwright. And we worked together. He was also a theater arts teacher for many years, but he's out there singing, and he's a singer-songwriter as well. But when he was 9 years old, he was at a camp, and at the camp, he was told to go with a partner and to explore, find arrowheads or whatever. And this was in northern Pennsylvania. And he was from New York, but they used to take a bus to this camp right on the border, and it was called Flat Rock. And so he and his friend David pebbled their way up into the woods and were looking for arrowheads and whatever. And he saw an old schoolhouse, a one-room schoolhouse, like a 19th century schoolhouse. And it was one room, and door was all kind of pulled over. And it was nestled in between an old cemetery and a, you know, like typical graveyard looking cemetery, and a big stone quarry. And he went in to the schoolhouse with his friend David. And he said it was almost like very magical, enchanting, because the light was coming in. It was really, really dusty, and the light was streaming in middle of the day. And the front of the schoolhouse was in order, perfect order. There was a teacher's desk with things on it, even a pen and an inkwell, and books along the side. But the rest of the schoolhouse had the desk torn apart and pulled apart, and then things all over the floor. So the student section of the schoolhouse was in complete disarray. So he picked up a book, and David picked up 2 books, and they went back to camp, and they told Mr. Tim, their camp counselor, that they wanted to go explore this and look what they found. And he said, sure, this is fantastic. And so they had lunch, and all the boys went back up to the camp. Back up to the schoolhouse. On one side was the cemetery, the graveyard, and there was the quarry, but there was no schoolhouse. This is not the play. I have a play called Schoolhouse, a musical that Joe and I wrote that's based on that story. True story. And my partner's a very, very down to earth singer-songwriter. He's not, fantastic or whatever. So that's the kind of thing I think when we're talking about what you were saying about, the institution of school needs to change. That's when we wrote that. I said to Joe, something happened, I guess it was 2015, and there was an incident when I was living in Pittsburgh of a little boy, 11th grader, who stabbed like 15 kids or 11 kids or something with a knife. And he just ran around stabbing people until they finally caught him. But how do you get that angry? And I don't put down the school system. I'll do whatever I can to help it. But you're absolutely right, Lois. There's something with the institution that is so result oriented. We can't live like this. And I think it's a myth that we live like this, that we really don't have tomorrow. Yesterday doesn't really exist, and tomorrow doesn't. We have now, and we really need to know how to deal with our now.
Oh, just a prime example. Look what happened yesterday in Texas.
Exactly.
The mental health issues are rampant, and talk about needing the arts to heal from trauma. the community in Texas is going to need a lot of healing, but so is everybody else, because everybody else is just, it's just one more added event on top of everything else. You know, I've spoken to a lot of people today that it just, everybody is like stunned, you know, it's like nobody knows what to say or what to do, but they all feel it. You
Yes.
know, it's like everybody keeps telling me, I feel something, you know, there's just something amiss. I feel like something,
We need
but
to
nobody
do
could,
something.
yeah, it just, you know, it's like, what do we do? What, you know, how do we use the arts for prevention?
Well, to speak to all of this, I taught in a special content program, an enrichment program for children, where I created the curriculum for about 2 years. And needless to say, I got so many great feedback from parents and letters, and really, and it was in an independent school that really loved what I was doing. And needless to say, just cut to the chase, the program wound up getting cut because of bureaucracy and money and all of that. And I know it was doing good just because years later, well, many things, but years later, I even got something from someone. It was a TA that I had worked with. And she said, look at this yearbook. You have 2 kids, and I recognized their names, this girl, Elizabeth, and this other girl, who said that their time in school, the whole time there, that the best class that, like, I think someone had said something about that before, the best thing that they had ever done during those years was my class, and mentioned me. And this was years later when they were graduating. And I thought, oh, yes, Amy. And I was like, oh my God, that meant so much to me to read that. And I was already like acting and doing other things and somewhere else in my life. But the thing that's so interesting is that, like, I would do something like Spoon River Anthology with 13-year-olds. And for anybody, Edgar Lee Masters familiar with it, you know, it's basically like epitaphs and gravestones in people's lives and a set of monologues. And the interesting thing was that they were almost scared. I asked the kids, and they're 13, 14 years old, to think about, well, what would they want their epitaphs to be? And we presented this. They were, you know, there was a creative aspect, very cool. And it was also for Halloween, but they would come out of the lockers, they would decorate their, like, a gravestone on the front of the locker. They would emerge one by one as each one closed and one opened. And it wound up, it was cool. It was great. But it unlocked things because I wanted them to pick the person that they felt connected with for some reason, their life, and why did they feel connected to that person, that monologue. And I wanted them to tell me, it was another part of the exercise. They didn't necessarily, we all shared it in class, but then we would do the final performance. But to get to that point in the monologues where they felt it and they felt connected, and also, you know, what they would want their own epitaphs to be and what they would want people to say about them. And, you know, generally parents thought this was great, but there were actually some people, like the principal, like, was disturbed by this. And I think it's a fear, like, to think about your own, we don't want these kids, they're like 13, like almost as if it would make you do something. Like, it was almost like a weird thing. You think that this would encourage someone if someone's having suicidal thoughts, because what happened was one of the students, and I think it was really helpful to her, was having a lot of problems because her mom had passed away and her dad had remarried. And she was having a lot of problems, like transitioning with her stepmom. And I, as a special content teacher who wasn't there all the time, she actually opened up to me, I think, in ways that she wouldn't open up to her homeroom teacher about some of this. And so I found out that she was actually in a really bad place and in a really bad way. And there's some other things that happened. And instead of thinking this is a great thing that this came out, and, you know, the parents talked to me and said, well, maybe she needs a psychiatrist. Maybe we need to take her to a therapist, or maybe we need to talk about this. We didn't know how she felt and she was acting out. I felt like the principal there was scared of the whole thing, almost like as if it brought out something that wasn't there, but it didn't. It was there, and it brought it out to the light of day so then it could be dealt with. And I found this really disturbing. This was one of the reasons why I didn't continue teaching, and those strict restrictions. And I'm like very open with how I want to gear the curriculum. But the whole point was to have like a thoughtful discussion. And these kids are, you know, they're entering adolescence and they're starting to think, and they're not really kids that small anymore, to think about who they are and who they will be in the world. But I saw, and it was really interesting, the young woman, the young girl who was growing up, I saw a change in her. after we did that. And she did, you know, her parents did start her in therapy. And I thought it had a really positive impact on her. And I couldn't have foreseen that this would happen, but needless to say, it was something positive that came out of this, besides just a good performance that people enjoyed in our classroom and, you know, exploring this material. But it was something, you know, because she was having a lot of negative thoughts, and they started surfacing when we were thinking about these things.
But that's what the arts do, you know, it can bring up, you know, and yes, in a school setting or any other setting, it can be scary to the administrators. I did a program also. It was also around the time of one of the school shootings years ago. And it was about drawing, we needed to, we were brought in, I was working for the Prevention Council, and we were brought in to let the kids actually start talking about their feelings and you know, learn about what emotions are and things like that. And I had them, I started with third graders, and we had them, if anger was a character, what would it look like? If anger was a sound, what would it sound like? If it was a dance, we hit on every, you know, art form that we possibly could. And these, if anger was in your body, where would you find it? These kids were so expressive. It was like they were dying to get all of this stuff out. The scariest part was I did the same project with the kids in detention, in the detention center. And when you compared their anger drawings to the kids in third grade, some of them were identical.
ASC certified expert.
So tell me that's, I mean, you can't do that, right? These kids are telling you in the third grade how they're feeling. And if we can get it out, maybe they won't end up in detention because they're expressing exactly what some of those kids are who are sitting there. You know, we did it with all the different, you know, with a couple of different emotions. And the teachers, you know, they followed through on it. They, you know, and when we needed the school counselor in there, the school counselor participated in ongoing sessions with the kids. But we were allowing them. And I've done that same exercise with adults as well. Really interesting, some very interesting expressions that you get from that. But that's it. Yeah.
I was going to say, Lois, before I worked in the schools, when I worked in hospitals and more clinical settings, and I would work with adolescents or young adults, we would have, something where, well, what emotions are there? And I know in the clinical settings with the young people who are hospitalized, the vocabulary of emotions was so stunted that typically the entire group, 8, 12 people would say, well, there's just anger, sadness, and happiness. That's it, and when I work with the kids in the school, there's a great list of emotions from I think it's the nonviolent, maybe somebody knows the name of it, but it's the coalition or the committee for nonviolent expression or something that gives a set of vocabulary for emotions that must have 150 words on it, many different nuances. And I think that one of the things with kids or people who find themselves in institutions for whatever reason is that they don't have a lot of nuanced vocabulary to express in words what their emotions are. So I always think in the school that that's one of the things that fits in very well educationally. So that with all of the kids that I work with, which is, the entire school at different points, I hand out that particular list so that we can talk about the different nuances, the different strengths. There may be a lot of different nuanced words that relate to anger, but maybe there are different strengths, or there's sort of different colors of it, in a sense, so that the vocabulary becomes broader and wider about how they can reflect on what they're feeling. And I don't think that, I think that that's a very valuable thing, that in an educational setting, there's room to do.
And it's important, because those children are going to grow up to be adults, and everything that they go through in the process of growing up, we all take in. And if we don't understand it, you don't know what's going to happen. The whole idea of healing from trauma is we're collectively over all of the years, we're constantly being bombarded with, so many different events.
Yes.
And if you don't know how to deal with it and don't know how to express yourself, then that's when we, run into problems and issues. So, Diane, did you want to say anything?
Right now, I'm just typing into the chat box materials that people may want to look at later.
Well, that's it. I'll send around, like I said, I'll send everybody a resource list so that, everybody can check out everything, everything else. But, it always goes back to, I don't know if you remember, Diane, back in, I think it was early 2000, when we first started doing the conferences, and we started talking about, the Arts and Health Initiative in New Jersey. At that point, it was something brand new. It was like, it's nice to see things evolve 20 years later. But, I like I said, I see it in adults all the time. I see it in my friends. I see, when they do not know how to express themselves, when, it's somebody tells them, write down how you're feeling, just pick up a journal in the morning and just start writing, brain drain games, just get it out. It's new, it's like a new thing to a lot of adults, I guess maybe in our age category. I'm hoping in the younger generation, they'll learn to use creativity and self-expression a little easier. I'm not quite sure I have that much hope for it, but I definitely think that well, how I feel about the arts and prevention. I've been talking about it for 20 plus years, so it's nothing new. But I think now, given everything that's gone on in the last 2 years, yesterday, it's even that much more important that we, allow and teach creative expression, and allowing kids and adults to just, to learn how to use it as a tool.
And I think, it takes a certain atmosphere for this to happen, or an environment to be created. But with these terrible experiences, it's also after the terrible experience is also an opportunity to be able to come together creatively.
Absolutely.
Right? And to express feelings, to make art, to connect with each other. And those are opportunities lost when what we're talking about doesn't happen. I wanted Carrie to reflect back to you that when you were sharing really so eloquently about your experiences, you said that you sort of put on like that happy face or that best face, that reminded me of a poem that I recently wrote. It was following the suicide of Naomi Judd. And I wrote that day after hearing of that, I wrote a poem called Lift You Up. And it starts off, you can never tell who's suffering. The most beautiful face, the most kind and loving heart, they hide their secret pain. And this, I reached out and found some collaborators, and it's become a song. It's a lyric video. And I'm going to share this in the sense of the hunger there is for, I think, that kind of art. And it ends with the suicide prevention number. You know, it's like, don't give up, be lifted up. Where it's been posted for about 12 days now and been viewed over 15,000 times and has over 700 likes. So I think that kind of speaks to that kind of need. And then with that creative energy that we were talking about, where, you know, like things happen and you go, how is that a coincidence? That can't be possible. So a coincidence that happened was when I had written the poem, was looking on Upwork for artists, musicians, one person that I did not choose for the project, in his application, he mentioned an organization called Backline. And I had never heard of Backline. And it's an organization that provides mental health resources and wellness and case management to help people in the music industry, musicians, industry, families. So I looked at the website, and then just this morning, in fact, they have an office in Portland, and I reached out, but nobody got back in touch with me. And then just yesterday, I was looking at it again, and they had a donation, like you can create your own donation site on their behalf. And I thought, wow, the song Lift You Up really goes with their mission, and especially the way it was created. So I created a donation site, you know, using Lift You Up. And then one of those like mysterious events is I was looking at their website again, and they use the words lift up in their website, right? To lift up the people in the music industry. So it's one of those. That's what I think is also exciting about, and that can be shared with people when they get creative, that there's some portal that's opened up and like amazing things can start happening and connections with other people can start happening. And it's almost like your eyes are opened up to see new possibilities, which is inspiring. And it's not only one's own experience, I think that can start happening to other people as well. And so that enthusiasm, or to be filled with that spirit, starts happening naturally.
Well, that's it. That's the audience part of, you know, somebody creates a piece of, you know, a song, a play, a canvas, and then you step back and you watch everybody respond to it. You know, it's that give and take with everybody else that it just keeps building and building. And you're right, I think it does show that people are just looking for this kind of outlet or whatever in order to connect, because people for the last 2 years haven't really been connecting, you know, too much. So that connection that you get by watching your videos, I mean, they're very moving.
And that connection too of saying, I'm not okay, right? How are you doing?
Well, but that's it. That's the other side of it, by saying, yeah, that all of a sudden lately in the last year, I think people have been saying it's okay to say I'm not okay. You know, it's like a new thing, but it's okay not to be okay. Nobody's perfect. Everybody doesn't have great days every single day of the year, you know, and that's where I always encourage everybody to, you know, do the doodle journals, do the scribbling, do the writing, just express yourself some way, somehow, and get it out, you know?
I think that's part of the self-care too, but that's hard to learn. It's easier in the last few years where the thing is we're coming more in touch with it. It's part of the self-care is saying when you're not okay, that I'm not okay, and not just being okay with that or pushing it under the carpet or having defense mechanisms to deal with it or putting a pretty face on it or, putting it in a different package, but basically just, cutting down to what it is. I'm not doing okay right now.
And it's okay to say that,
Yes.
you know? And it also, it's okay to write down negative thoughts, it's not going to, like you said, because I write down some negative thoughts that I'm thinking or feeling doesn't mean the end of the world. It just means that particular time, that's how I'm feeling, and that's okay.
I think also it has something to do with how we're raised too. We can't get over that, if you're raised by parents sometimes too, that always put on a good face, or no matter what's happened to them, maybe you don't even know the extent to things that they've gone through in their lives, that they just try to keep moving forward. And as long as the best thing that you can do is say, oh, I'm fine, it's okay, how are you doing? But when you're asking how you're doing, you're not really asking for a real answer. It's almost like to say the obligatory, oh, I'm okay, or I'm good, or I'm fine. And I think that's part of it. And it's also societal too, and cultural, which is starting to change those attitudes, which is a good thing.
Well, that's the typical. Somebody says, well, how you doing today? I'm fine. If I had $1 for every time somebody said I'm fine, I'd be very rich right now. It's like, okay, but tell me how you really do. To get that blockade, that wall that everybody puts up there. But it's I just always find, all of creativity is fascinating, and it offers hope and possibilities, and it's endless, the things that we can do if we just learn. And it's not that difficult. We just, for adults, we have to get over that blank page syndrome. If put a blank page in front of somebody, and that old stereotype is, I can't draw, I can't write, I can't, it's okay. Make a little mark on the paper, or I'll make a little mark on the paper and give it right back to you. Now it's not a blank sheet of paper anymore. Now you could do what you want with it. So it's not as threatening, and I think those are the ways that we all need to, to utilize to prevent being traumatized, to heal from trauma, to heal from stress. That's my opinion anyways. Any final thoughts before we end the evening? No final thoughts?
Just wanted to thank you for bringing us all together.
Oh, it's my pleasure to do that. I think it's important that we, get together and talk about things like this as much, whenever we can. And I certainly will try to do that, always. So I also want to thank everybody for coming. And if you have any questions or anything, everybody knows how to get in touch with me. And everybody will be hearing from me, because I'll send around the resource list for everybody. And everybody watch out for our play coming out next year sometime, called The Therapist by Connie. Okay, so I thank everybody. Everybody have a great Memorial Day weekend.
Okay,
Thank you, Lois. Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
All right, thanks.
I'll let everybody know when I put the recording on YouTube.
Good. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thanks
Night.
for
Have a
hosting
good
it.
weekend. Thank you, Lois.
My pleasure.